Hello and welcome to episode 75 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark, and joining me on today's episode is one of my favourite photographers in the business. I'm joined by Merri Cyr. Now, Merri is responsible for one of my most favourite images and favourite album covers of all time, Jeff Buckley's Grace. This album is so personal to me. It's easily one of my most listened to albums, and Jeff Buckley for me is one of the most talented musicians, by far one of the best singers in the business. And I think it was about 12 months ago, I was lucky enough to put out a tribute where I got to sit down with David Laurie, his manager, and talk all about the life of Jeff. But I remember when I put that episode, I always thought to myself, as it got released, I always wanted to follow it up, and Merri was high on my list. Someone that is such a personal and close friend of Jeff's, but also responsible for those iconic images that we see all over the internet, all in these incredible books. They're all down to Merri, and I can't wait for her to be joining me on today's episode. But before I get into that interview, you know the score by now, I like to talk about the last episode. So I was joined by the Thrice frontman, Dustin Kensrue, one of my favourite singers in the business. Thrice are easily my favourite band in the business, so to have the opportunity to sit down whilst they're on tour and talk face to face with Dustin was just absolutely awesome. A great guy, and I'm so excited about his podcast, Carry the Fire. I'm a subscriber, I'm a Patreon, and I listen to every single episode. It gets better week after week, and I'm so proud of what he's doing, and I can't wait for the future of the podcast, but also the future of Thrice, because right now they're going to be recording and writing more material, and it was just such a great interview, so thanks again for everybody that listened to that. But let's get back into today's episode. As a huge Jeff Buckley fan, this is a dream come true, and I can't wait to share it. So here's me and Merri Cyr talking all things Jeff Buckley. So Merri, thank you for joining me today on the Mark and Me podcast.
Good to be here.
So for the listeners out there, what I wanted to know today was basically taking it right back to the start. And when was it that you discovered you wanted to be a photographer? Was it at a very young age? Were you at school, or was it a bit later on in life?
Actually, I have a bit of an unusual story. When I was 15, I ended up winning a modeling contest for a product called Love's Baby Soft, and that was a perfume that was very popular at the time with teenage girls. And what happened is I ended up going to New York City and staying at a very nice hotel, the Pierre Hotel. And I ended up being photographed by Richard Avedon, who is like a pretty big fashion photographer and all-around great photographer. But it was my first exposure to photography, as a job. And I didn't really end up loving modeling, but I ended up falling in love with photography. And so as a teen, I started doing some photography myself, and I ended up going to art school in New York City at Pratt Institute.
Wow. So did you say you were only 15 when this first happened?
Yes, and it was weird because I'm from a very small town in Massachusetts. I grew up near the ocean and fishing and doing all sorts of outdoorsy, beachy stuff. So going to New York was an amazing experience. And also, I think the other thing that happened for me is that it introduced me to New York City, which became my home. I think once I saw New York, I knew that I had to go be there. And, I was still young. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I definitely had to be in New York City. That decision was made when I was 15. So
wow.
Yeah.
So when you were growing up, obviously at the age of 15, you had this amazing opportunity, and it seems to have opened a lot of doors for you. And then, you went to go to New York. But before then, what was it, or who was it, or was it certain album covers or books? What was it that kind of got that interest in photography?
Well, I think the thing that really attracted me to photography was, I don't know that I was aware of this so much initially, but I'm a very visual person, and it was something that I could do and do well. I had never done super well academically. I was sort of a dreamer and drifty, and, so photography really captured my imagination when I was a teenager, and then I really further developed that when I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. I started at Parsons School of Design. I went there for a year, but that was a little too fashion-oriented for me, and I really loved Brooklyn. I started college there in 1982 and graduated in 86, so from Pratt. And, photography was kind of a thing. I could spend 12 hours in a dark room, no problem. I really just loved everything about it, about photography. In those days, you worked with film, so there was a lot of different steps in photography. First you would shoot, and then you'd develop the film, and then you would make the contact sheets, and then you'd make proof prints, and then you would make final prints, So it was very delineated, and I loved that. And, the whole process, everything about it. And, I've been doing it for a long time, and I still really love being a photographer.
Was there any certain photographers that you took influence from, or that you were very interested in, where you would try and seek out more of their work? Because back then you didn't have stuff like Facebook and Instagram, so finding people's work wasn't as easy as it is now.
Right. So it was a bit of a process. I think when I initially did the modeling, of course, I was exposed to fashion photography and fashion photographers.
Yeah.
And there are wonderful fashion photographers that I really loved from that time. Somebody I really enjoyed looking at was an Italian photographer, Paolo Roversi. He was one of my favorite fashion people. I liked Deborah Turbeville. I really liked, also when I was in college, one of my exercises for myself was to really try to imitate Richard Avedon's lighting, Ultimately, I wasn't really interested in fashion photography, but there were a lot of fashion photographers that I loved. So I think following the fashion influence, I really became much more interested in documentary and street photography. And that's also what I really pursued when I was at Pratt Institute. They had really great teachers. Like there was a guy named Bill Gedney, who's a really amazing photographer, who was there. I really loved his work. And I really love street photography and going around in New York and trying to become invisible and photographing people and scenes on the street. And New York was an endlessly fascinating place to photograph.
It's one of my favourite places, and I was only there a couple of years ago for my dad's birthday. We took him out for his 80th birthday, and I fell in love with it. And, it's the amount of material you could get, I'm sure, with a camera is endless. I absolutely love the place. When you mentioned Brooklyn, it's so iconic, isn't it? It's absolutely stunning.
Well, Brooklyn is a funny thing. I just read, I've been there just since recently. I just moved in November back up to Massachusetts, where I grew up. But I spent my whole adult life as a photographer in New York City, and it just, it was such a wonderful place to have a career. And, also I have to say, Brooklyn, when I first moved there in the 80s, it was rough. It was not the current iteration of New York doesn't have any resemblance to like New York City in the 80s. Like in the 80s, it was very dangerous. And I'll tell you, one of my weird jobs I had in the 80s was I worked for the DA's office in Queens, which is right near Brooklyn. And my job was to take video confessions from criminals. And, so I would get beeped. So we had beepers then, and I would get beeped in the middle of the night. And I would drive out to some precinct out in far Rockaway, Queens, in the middle of a very scary neighborhood in those days. And, have to find a police precinct with a map. It's an area I wasn't familiar with. There was no GPS, so I was always lost in Queens trying to find some police precinct. But I ended up taking confessions from, a lot of crackheads for the most part, because in the 80s, in the mid to late 80s, actually that was in the later 80s, but crack became a real scourge on the Brooklyn landscape, and it was scary out there. You could just get killed or mugged all the time. I try to, I find it hilarious. More recently when I've tried, when you talk to younger people that are, not familiar with the old New York, and you try to describe what it was like, people, they just can't, they can't really fathom what you're talking about. Like, it'd be like, what? Like, I had to run to my front door, so I didn't get mugged. So, that doesn't sound like fun to everybody, but for me, that was like, I had such an adventure living in Brooklyn in the late 80s and throughout the 90s. I mean, it didn't really get cleaned up until, Giuliani was mayor, and he really corporatized New York in a way that, in the old days, it wasn't like that at all. And, the marking of that was, I can't remember which year it happened, but Disney, Walt Disney ended up buying a huge chunk of 42nd Street. And what happened was there used to be all porno theaters along 42nd Street, and it, it totally kicked out all of the porn theaters and turned it into sort of a Disneyland. That was sort of the beginning of the new New York.
What a contrast, going from those porn clubs to Mickey Mouse.
Yes, exactly. But, and it's hard to really describe to people why you miss that. Like, why do you miss the old porno theaters on 42nd Street? It was just, it was kind of like being in the Wild West before that. And, I think for artists, it was a place where an artist could really create themselves and really find their own thing and their own voice. And, I think New York was a mecca for weirdos and artists from all over the country would gravitate to New York. And that's why I feel like, when I was 15 and I first really got exposed to New York, I knew right away it was the place for me to go.
So then, during the 80s, when you were in New York, at what point was it that you started being able to make a living and knowing that you didn't have to have a second job and do all this, that you could survive on just your photography?
Well, this brings us to Jeff Buckley. What happened was, Jeff was very instrumental in allowing me to, he basically got me my first job with Sony. When I photographed him for the Love at Cine EP, he's the one who got me into the Sony system. And after I did that initial job, I ended up doing quite a few more jobs and having a music photography career. So I ended up working for other music companies and stuff in the 90s. And but Jeff really got me he fought for me. He got me my first job in there. Before that, I had only photographed him for a magazine, for Paper Magazine. And from that initial shoot, he decided I was the one that was going to be shooting his first album cover. So after I did that first album cover, that was really the marker for when I didn't have to do any other jobs. I just became a photographer. So, he's very important to me.
I was very intrigued on if you had done much band or solo musicians or music scenes before meeting Jeff. I didn't know if that was your introduction or now you've told me, but I was quite intrigued about that.
Well, when I first met Jeff, it was on assignment for this magazine, Paper Magazine, that was sort of a trendy magazine. in Manhattan. And, it was very fashion oriented and stuff like that. And they would give me a lot of jobs. Like, they didn't really pay you anything, but it was a way after I got out of school to build up my portfolio. And I was I was able to photograph people like Wim Wenders and a lot of film directors and musicians and rappers. It was an amazing job because it really gave me a diversity of entertainers, and I was really attracted to photographing people. I think not just musicians, but artists. I really love working with artists and other artists. That is, and I think a lot of times that's because even if they work in a different medium, we can find a collaborative space together because they kind of understand the process of what I'm doing. If somebody's a musician, they have their own type of process, but there's a way to relate that to what I'm doing photographically. So I really love collaborating with artists. They come up with weird ideas and things for you to bounce off, and it becomes play. And that's what I love about being a photographer. I've always been able to play in whatever type of job that I'm doing. Yeah.
Has there been some jobs that you've been on with bands or musicians that have been too challenging, where you thought, this just isn't going to work, our ideas aren't going to be collaborative, it's just not going to work?
Well, I think I did this album cover. It was for Warner Brothers, and it was I'm not going to say who it was, but it was a rap musician. It was a woman, and she was great and everything, but she had this manager who really just wanted me to take a booty shot. Like, he just really wanted a shot of her ass. And I was just like, I don't do that, So that was a painful shoot. And in the end, he's like, oh, just take this shot in front of this Mercedes, And he really, the musician she was young, she was really nice. But he really just wanted a shot of her butt, and I think that was like a terrible shoot. That's the worst shoot. I don't even like to talk about it because I don't want you to look it up.
No, that's fair.
I'm a little, and in the end, the guy got me. There was 2 shots I took of her in front of this Mercedes, and I had a strobe. It was outside on the street in Brooklyn, and he made her turn around and he said, take this shot. And I ended up taking 2 shots. And, she had short shorts on. Anyway, that was the album cover. And the thing I remember, and it was horrible, I just felt like, a bad woman too, like not really like sticking up for women's, like, what do you mean you want a butt shot, And the most horrible thing was I was up on 42nd Street or Times Square, one of the big music stores, I can't remember which one, and there was like I don't know, it must have been 10 feet by 10 feet Duratrans in the window of this woman's butt, and I took that shot, and I was just like, oh my God, this is horrible. I don't know, So
let's flip it around then. What's some of the best jobs you've worked on that you've been so proud of?
Well, there's obviously the Jeff stuff. I've always loved collaborating with him. But I did Lilith Fair for Rolling Stone, and that was a really great job. That was in the 98, 97. And that was an awesome job because I got to travel around with a writer and be backstage with the musicians and shoot in that documentary style that I really enjoy shooting in. And I got to shoot a lot of great, singers, Paula Cole and Sarah McLachlan and a lot of really great, it was a folky style that was very popular at that time, and but the tour was really great, and I enjoyed that.
The way I was introduced to your work was obviously via the Grace album, which is, in my opinion, my favourite album of all time. I bought the book, A Wished For Song, and I fell in love, and I was looking through it, and it's so well put together, it's so well respected. I think, there's stuff coming out at the moment where there's Jeff's journals being released and all this, which I'm just not for, but the way you put this book together as like a celebration and collection of all these amazing shots. What was it like working with Jeff and be around as a person?
Well, Jeff is an artist, and I mean, in like all of that glory of, I mean, he's somewhat temperamental, amazing. He's, he could be very generous, and I would say he had a very mercurial personality, that he was very generous. He loved to collaborate with other artists. That's why I think we got on really well, is that is also something that I really enjoy. I mean, a lot of times I'm a type of person who is very solitary or likes to work alone, but when it comes to photographing artists, I really get the opportunity to collaborate and really share a vision with somebody else. And Jeff, in that regard, particularly, is very generous with himself. He was willing to try anything, and I mean it. Like, he let me follow him everywhere. I'd follow him into the bathroom. I'd follow him everywhere, and he never said to me, "No, Merri, you can't come here. Just get out." And he didn't really ever. I don't think he ever said that to me, and that in itself is pretty amazing. I mean, most people, at least to some degree or another, are more private than that. Like, all right, that's enough already. But he never, no matter what I did, he never really said, "No, we're not. I'm not doing that." He never said that to me, and I think that is the amazing thing. Like, even if he didn't know what I was alluding to or talking about particularly, he'd be like, "Okay, let's try it," And I have to say, that's pretty, for me, that's a lot. That's very generous. So that's how I would describe him as a collaborator. He's extremely generous.
So when he was actually working on the Grace album, and you had this now cover that is just legendary, when you look at the top album covers, there's always people like Nirvana and the Stone Roses and the Rolling Stones, and you get all these classic albums, but Jeff is always in the top 20. He's always there. It's the best debut album in my opinion, and the cover's very unique. I read a lot of stories about how he wanted the image to look, and the image they went with was not even kind of planned. He was just kind of putting on a jacket. And is that true? Is he just messing around on the shoot to try and do that, or was it quite a staged photo, or how did it work out?
Well, for the album cover shot, there's a number of different stories about that. I mean, during the shoot, that was a point when we were just about to take a break, and he was hungry, and we were going to have lunch, and he started eating this banana. And I think there's this thing that people don't really know about Jeff sometimes, is Jeff was an extremely humorous person. He was sort of like, he had a very good comedic timing. So at that point in the shoot, I think he was blowing off some steam and like fooling around, and I would say maybe like overacting some things a little bit just for fun. We were playing around, which is what, why I think we got some good pics, is that he would play and we would play, and that would produce the pictures. But the clothing for that shoot, that jacket was his. That's a vintage jacket that I think he bought off the street or out from a small vintage store or something in the village. He usually got a lot of his stuff off the street. People would just lay out blankets and sell their stuff on the street in the old days. I don't think he can do that anymore without a license, but everybody down on Avenue A and stuff, they'd have these blankets out on the street where you could buy stuff. And sometimes it'd be like really weird stuff, like somebody's broken old toys or something, or somebody's like fur coat and broken dollies or something,
Yeah.
So, there was a couple different things about the cover, and one was, I think, that not everybody at the record company maybe liked his glitter jacket, and I think other people wanted to have a different type of shot. That they thought that might be a little effeminate. I hate to say that because it seems so ridiculous, but I think they wanted, I think the company had a pretty strong idea of how they wanted to market them and market Jeff. And I don't think he had the same idea about it. That's what I think that was about. But, that was a shot he chose off of a contact sheet, and he wanted that right from the beginning. I remember when we were looking at the contact sheets after the shoot, and I had printed some proof prints of the shots that I really liked from the shoot, and the album cover wasn't one of them. I was like, yeah, it's all right, it's okay. But he saw something totally different in that shot. When he looked at that photograph, he could really tell that he was listening to the music. And that's what he said. He said, I can tell I'm listening to the music. That's it. That's the album cover. And he never deviated from that. And, the first contact sheet image he saw was only like an inch big. It's by an inch and 3/4 or something. And you could tell from there. And he never changed his mind from there.
So then obviously this album came out, it blew up. That's, like you said, you never then had to worry about kind of having to do a day job as well as the photography, and your career, it just went from strength to strength. So you must have spent quite a lot of time with Jeff, because obviously I've seen all the different photos you've got backstage and at his apartment and stuff, and you must have become this really tight unit for him to trust you and, like you said, never say to you, stop following me, piss off. He was happy to have you around.
Yes, but I think Jeff, once Grace came out, he was really touring a lot. I think he toured more than anybody else ever. Like, I don't think there was a time when he really stopped touring. It seems he was always, on tour in Australia, or he went to Japan, he went all over Europe, he went everywhere. So, especially when he was promoting Grace, I didn't see him for a long time, and then I saw him when he came back now and again, but it wasn't until the tail end of the Grace tour that I photographed him for a few weeks straight. That covered places like Texas and New Orleans and Florida, multiple locations down south there. So that was really wonderful because, it was 100% saturation. I was able to photograph all the time and the way I liked and documentary style, and which doesn't mean we didn't do portraits, because, we take the guys around and we do portraits, on the street. We did a bunch of them in Austin, and we did some different ones in New York. So, but, I think it was full saturation when Jeff came back to town, from being on tour. So when he'd come back, he'd be like, okay, I'm back. Let's go. Let's do this. Let's do that. So he kind of demanded, like, I'm not going to say 100% attention, but once he was back, he's like, okay, I'm back. Like, let's, he had, things he wanted to do. But like when he was gone, he was just really gone, When
he returned, and obviously this album blew up, and it was, no one expected it to be as popular as it was. Did you think Jeff was happy? Did you see a change in him from the guy that you photographed for the Shine album, or was he completely different, or was he still the Jeff that you always knew?
No, I mean, he changed. When I first met him, he was definitely a lot more of a goober. He was a lot goofier, less serious. He didn't have the same pressures on him. So I think once he had gone on tour, and again, because he didn't really take any breaks, he was exhausted and a lot. And I think just the demands on him, like psychically, about being in the public sphere all the time, I think that took its toll. He didn't really have time to have any kind of regular life. I'm not saying he didn't enjoy that. I think, he seems like a natural for being on the road. He seemed to really like it. And, I think he grew up that way, so I don't think it was weird for him. From what he told me, when he was a kid, he ended up moving around a lot and, living out of paper bags is how he put it. So I think the idea of being mobile and on the road was sort of a natural state for him, but he didn't really know how to do normal human being stuff like take a break or take a vacation or just do something to relax. I think I remember him asking me one time, like, well, what do you do on vacation? And I'm like, well, you just go lay on the beach and read a book or go to the gym and blow off some steam. And he's like, I don't have time for that kind of stuff. It's pretty much, I think, would be his response, like the things regular people did sometimes seemed to him to be like weird ideas, like vacations, things like that.
I don't always want to talk about it. It was a conversation that when I had with Dave, I found quite difficult because it still feels very raw even after all this time. But obviously, when we lost Jeff, can you remember where you were and how you found out?
Yep, I was in my apartment, and a guy from Sony named Steve Sussman gave me a call, and he said he just told me that Jeff had gone missing. And my first response was that I just thought Jeff was playing a prank. To be honest, I didn't believe it. I just thought that he was fucking with people, and because he had a weird sense of humor. It just didn't seem. It didn't seem possible, for one, and I also think that I could see him doing that. Oh, I'm just gonna like take off and fuck him or
disappear.
Something,
Yeah.
But it wasn't that, unfortunately, and it was really a very difficult time, and it was a bad time.
And what's your views on it now when you've had so many years to reflect? Do you think it was an accident? Do you think he was fed up? Or do you think he was having the time of his life?
Well, maybe all of the above, I don't know if it's like, I think people try to parse it out and like say, oh, did he kill himself or didn't he kill himself, or no way he didn't do that, or he did drugs or he didn't do drugs, or everybody's got, Jeff was I would say a very compartmentalized person. I think he shared different things with different people, and I think he was actually a different person for different people who knew him, and maybe we're all like that, but the one thing I do have to say is that there was always an awareness in me when I photographed him, and I think it comes out in the photographs sometimes. He just seemed like he wasn't going to make it past a certain point. And, I don't know if it was because of his dad or that his dad died so young and OD'd so young, but I think that's a large part of it. Sometimes I think he was on a similar trajectory, and I don't know why, if that's something he chose particularly, or whether it was fated, or however you want to look at it. It was just, all I can say is that there was always an awareness that he might not be here so long. And, I didn't want that to be true. And I think, I didn't want that to be true. But, I don't know. He was on some other kind of mythical trajectory where his life was rolling out, or he was making choices that had to do with I can't, it's really hard to put my finger on it exactly and say, oh yeah, it's this, oh yeah, it's that, because it's not like that. It's more like a feeling that was always there, and it always came up in the work too. There's all these very watery, reflective things photos I have of him all over the place. And, you know, that was just always there. So I don't really think, you know, people want a yes or no answer. And I don't think it's like that. I think it's more like people, you know, whether it was just that he had enough of being here on Earth or whatever. I don't know. Is that conscious? I don't know. I'm not sure, you know, and I don't think anybody can say that for sure.
And what was the last time you spent with him?
Well, the last time I actually saw him in person was probably a year before.
Yeah.
But because he was down south a lot then, he was trying to, you know, I just felt like when he was down south there, he was trying to become a person, you know, and not just, I guess, be a product. I don't know. He wanted to, you know, buy this house. He liked that community down there in Tennessee, and he wanted to buy. He was trying to buy this old car from some guy that didn't want to sell his car, but Jeff kept going back and asking him to buy it. You know, the last time I talked with Jeff, I think it must have been. It was in that spring. It was. I don't know if it was a month.
Yeah.
Or 6 weeks before he died, but I feel like the last time we talked, he was really just trying to set himself up down there and have a home and, you know, find a place to live. I think maybe being on the road so much maybe finally took its toll, and he really just wanted a place to call home, maybe, you know?
And now, 25 years later, which time flies, the older I get, I can't believe how the days go so quick.
I know, you wake up one day and you're like,
it's crazy.
Like, what?
I know, I just the months ago, like, I think every single month is just like, wait, hold my beer, I'm going to try and be faster than the one previous, and I can't believe we're in September now. But you're releasing your 25 Years of Grace book, and you know, the celebration of his life and the album and the amazing collaborative work you did with him. And I just wondered, has this been something you've been planning for a few years, or was it just the fact that now we're at the 25th anniversary you wanted to celebrate his legacy?
Well, that's a little bit more complicated. It's kind of for the 20th year anniversary of the album, I did something with Rolling Stone Australia, and, you know, they ended up using all my pictures for this article, and they interviewed everybody. And so I had been thinking after that I'd really like to make a more expanded version of that. And, you know, I think the interesting thing that happened in the interviews with the new book that I've done is that I interviewed everybody involved in the making of Grace, so publicists, A&R, engineers, everybody, the band, of course, anybody involved in making Grace, I tried to interview, and I think I got most everybody. And it was really interesting because it kind of gave a bit of a snapshot of what the music industry was like in the 90s, which I think is sort of interesting. I don't think it works quite the same way anymore, of course, since the age of the internet.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was Sony at that time was like kind of a behemoth, you know, a huge corporation, you know, and there was lots of money they'd spend on videos and albums and stuff like that. So it was kind of an interesting time, and that all changed, of course, as the internet kind of became the mass distribution for music. Yeah. So what happened was the company had put out Wished For Song, the book that I did in 2002. They approached me and asked me to do the 25th anniversary book, which I had already strangely been thinking about already anyhow. So I was like, okay. And they were great. I had worked with them before, so it seemed comfortable and good. And the thing that happened this time that's really nice in this book is the images are nice and big. It's in a 12 by 12 format. It folds out to 24 inches. So the pictures are nice and big and lush. And then also, again, I really feel like the interviews became much more important than I actually initially thought they would be. I really found out what people did in their jobs working with Jeff and working in the music industry. So I thought that was sort of interesting. That it's sort of a B story, but not really, because it's focused on specifically on the making of Grace.
I'm so excited to get it. I've ordered it and it's with Amazon, and I think it's like October.
Me too. I'm excited. I've seen I got the signatures, which are just the pieces of the book, they do them in 16-page signatures. And, it's not the final printing, but it was just really nice to see the images. I know, super large. They're large, and they look beautiful. So I'm just like, yay, because it's nice to see it. I really enjoyed making a wished-for song, but, the images were sort of small, and of course I want to see them big. They're my pictures. Yay!
I bought that book in paperback and hardback. Well, hardback is just in my collection as do not touch, leave this, don't ever fold the page, just let it be. And my paperback is my sit down and enjoy. It's like my precious little book that you shouldn't touch. And I'm going to do the same with the new one. I want the hardback, the special, decent, big, expensive, proper version, and then my version that I don't mind if I've, slightly got a bit of, I've had a cup of tea and I've got a grease on my hand or something. It's okay to touch this one,
Well, I'm going to send out... I don't get some first copies until the end of September, but definitely give me your address because I'd like to send you a copy.
That would be awesome. So, after the release of this book and everything that's gone on, and obviously your previous work, how are you spending your time now? Obviously, are you still taking photos every day? Are you still working as hard as you used to, or are you trying and get a good balance?
Yes. I just had a big transition recently. For the past 10 years or so, I was working with Apple in New York because they have a couple of stores there in both Soho and Williamsburg, and I would photograph the events there. So that really took a lot of my time for the last 10 years. But in the last 3 years, I also have been getting my master's, my MFA, and it was good. I started studying a little bit more art history theory and stuff like that, and really have enjoyed that. So I just finished in May, so I needed I did my thesis and everything, so I'm just at the end of recuperating from that now and rebooting everything, but I'm just trying to incorporate some of the new things I learned into my practice, and some of that's teaching. I do enjoy teaching, and I'd like to do a little bit more of that, but I'm still shooting the musicians here and there. And we just came out of New York recently too. We just moved out in November, so I'm getting used to country life again.
And how is that? Is it because it's such a contrast, isn't it? You've gone from the busiest city, the most commercial city, the lights, the place that never shuts, to now having a bit more of a quiet, better balance.
Yes. Well, as I mentioned before, New York is not really the same New York I initially moved to.
Yeah.
And I think over the past 10 years, even 5 years, more like 5 years, I hadn't really enjoyed living in New York quite so much. And the environment has changed, but also it's becoming a more and more corporate space. It's very, it's not really meant for artists so much now. It's extremely expensive. The neighborhood I moved to, Williamsburg, when I moved there, it was a Polish neighborhood. Then there was, scattered artists here and there. And now it's like, it's pretty much for rich people now, and with people with nannies and all that kind of stuff. And that's fine, but it's not really a space for an artist so much, I would say. It's too, there's not enough room there. It's very corporate. And, that's not the New York. I hate to sound like such an old guy, but it's just, I don't know. I'm enjoying my transition into the country life a lot. I have a bunch of chickens. I have my garden. I'm getting reacquainted with nature.
Something you've missed out on, I'm sure, being in the Big Apple.
Yeah, that's what was always in Greenpoint, Williamsburg. We had McCarran Park there, but I wouldn't really call that nature. So, yeah. But, once in a while I have a feeling like I miss New York, but really I kind of miss the old New York, if you want to know the truth.
My final question for you today, and you kind of touched base on it a bit, and especially with the music industry and how it's changed. I think it's easier to do things now. If you want to be in a band, you can record an album at home for no money, when 10, 20 years ago you had to spend thousands. But the same with photography, Everyone on Instagram thinks they're a photographer now with a filter, but
I know
everybody is a photographer. And I just wondered how you would kind of guide someone or give them advice who's listening, who wants to be the standout photographer now, because we're inundated with people. It's a hard place now, this world, to make a name for yourself, and you're usually famous for around 5 minutes and then you're just brushed aside and it's next. But how would you give that advice to someone now that wants to be like you and have that career and shoot those people and produce those albums that they're proud of?
Well, I think there's pros and cons to the, past and the present. Like in the past, you didn't have access. I couldn't you'd have to call somebody on the phone, and cold calling somebody you don't know, they barely ever answer. Because of the internet, if you have something interesting to show, or something good that will catch somebody's attention, you can get in touch with almost anybody. It's amazing, whether you do it through somebody's manager online. If you have something, people will respond. So that's the positive thing I think about now. There's a lot of different avenues people can follow to achieve their goals. However, as you mentioned, now everybody and their brother is a photographer, is a musician, is everything, without a lot of times without actually doing the work it takes to get there and to do that. And technology is there to assist a vision. It doesn't replace a vision. So, no matter how sophisticated or easy technology gets to use, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who does it has a great idea. And that's why there's phrases like creatives or content or things like that. There's a lot of content out there to wade through. So that's the difficulty of now. You have the technological tools that can help you achieve your goals, but and to distribute them and get attention. But you also have so much competition, and there's a lot of subterfuge in that there's just so much stuff. So in the old days, you didn't have so many people trying to do the same job you were doing, but it was harder to get in touch with the people you wanted to talk to.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, Jeff kind of broke me into Sony in the 90s. And, just a quick weird story about that is, the art director that was Jeff's the art director that did Grace, Chris, he actually had a lot of my promotional materials in his office when I went there for the first meeting with Jeff. And I was amazed. I was like, I looked on his wall, and he had 2 of my promo pieces framed, and weirdly, a picture of me that a photographer friend took of me. And I kind of was like, geez, why didn't you ever call me and give me a job? I mean, he liked my work apparently because he had framed some of it. But it really took Jeff to bring me into that space to get him to give me a job. And I think that that's the thing I'm going to say is the same now as it is then, is that you're going to get most of your work through your personal relationships and the people that you collaborate with and make friends with. That's going to happen more if you do those collaborations. Like if you're just cold calling people or approaching people that you don't know, it's less likely. So you really, when I was younger, I would go to salons with other photographer friends who would look at each other's work and critique each other and try to help each other. And I still think that that's very important, especially now because, if you're really serious, like for instance, about being a photographer, you have to put in the time. There's no substitute for, you have to do it all the time. That's all there is to it. To get better, you just have to keep doing it. And, and if you do that, then you'll find your own voice eventually. Initially you have to copy other people, imitate them or imitate their lighting. But eventually, if you just keep doing the work, you will find what you're really attracted to. Your color scheme, your lighting that you like, your style of shooting. But I don't think an Instagram photo is a substitute for, where the filters are the dominant thing that create the vibe of the photo. Everybody else is doing that too. So, a person has to still find a way to differentiate themselves from the crowd, right? And that's the important thing. Then you have to put your time in. I know it's a drag, but you got to do it. So,
I don't think some people appreciate how much time you have to put in as well. Like sometimes they think, oh, you did an interview for a podcast, you met someone, recorded it, and that's it. It's like, no, it takes the background work, the relationship building, the trust element, the producing of it, the artwork, the design that goes with it, the editing of it and producing it so it sounds professional, and then putting it out there and distributing it. And people don't realise how much effort goes into just the small little things. And I think as a photographer, it must be the same. Oh, wow, that was a really good photo. You just caught it at the right time. It's like, no, I had to know when the right time was,
Well, or just like, for instance, I like to shoot documentary style. A lot of that is waiting. Like if I'm photographing in a small club, and it's the old days, and I have like 3200 ASA film, and it's a dark club, and I'm looking, I'm waiting for the guy to get his head in the right spot in the light and have the right expression. So there's a lot of waiting and patience that's involved in that, and you have to be willing to do that kind of stuff. Like you have to become, whatever field you're in, you have to become very observant of your environment and what's happening, and that's a practice thing, I think. And as you must know from doing the podcast, it's probably different than when you started than now. I mean, I'm sure you've learned a tremendous amount, right? And things have changed in your technique, right?
Massively. I think I need to I think the biggest lesson I taught myself was just to stop sometimes and let people talk and allow that space. I listen to too many podcasts where it's like, how are you? Oh, great, I'm well too, and I'm really happy today. And it's like, no, you asked how she was, let us say how she is, and then we'll ask the next question,
Well, I don't know. That means I get to ramble, and I can really ramble. So
I love it. I could listen to you all day, so I will never complain. I absolutely love listening to people talk. So I think if you allow them the space and the time and the respect, I think it's gold, and that's what this world misses right now.
Yeah, do you feel like the content is a little thin sometimes?
It's just so fake now. It's just everyone's trying to sell something in 5 minutes, and every snippet is a 2-minute video. And if you want longer on Instagram, you can't do longer than a couple of minutes because people just don't have the attention span. Film trailers are 2 minutes. A film is now an hour and a half. People haven't got the patience of they just want something quick done, and it's a shame.
Yes. I agree, but I wonder what will engage people that way. I wonder how you can get people's attention now.
I'm not sure now, but there's a big audience out there that's still like a proper conversation, and that's why I still do this, and I'll continue to do it. And I think if you get to hear a snippet of someone, you can hear that on every single station because they're there to sell a book or sell a film. But if you actually have a proper conversation, you learn more about why they're doing that book and how it's become. And that's...
Yeah, which I would say that's true. And then also, that is true. Like in most of the time in interviews, especially about the Jeff Buckley stuff. Also, I think, people want to hear what they want to hear sometimes too. They have certain questions that they want certain responses to. And if you don't say that, I don't like it sometimes,
And not having a motive is quite nice. Sitting here and just talking about Jeff and your career and what influenced you, and it'd be like the same conversation we'd have if we met in a bar and just had a drink and were talking and discovering about each other. And that's what I think is important. I think if I'm just there saying, "Did you think Jeff was suicidal?" What's that going to do? It doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't really yeah, and also trying to get concrete answers to things that are a little more mysterious. Sometimes that doesn't work either. They're just sometimes things are just mysterious. You can kind of look at the mysteriousness of them, or describe them, or take photographs of them. But really, that's the thing I have to say about my time with Jeff is part of me just feels like I was kind of a witness to him passing through, and that was my job, I guess, with him, or my that's just how it turned out, in terms of what our dynamic was and our relationship. Like, he wanted me to witness that and photograph that and save that, I guess, for posterity, I guess. But I know that's true. Jeff on one level was also very practical. He understood that, I think having a personalized image, photos taken by somebody who cared about him were gonna have a different effect than if you just went in and took that photograph. I just met him, I took the photo, and that's it. So I think he understood the influence that could have on the images and how he was perceived and how he was portrayed. So I think that's why, once we did some work, he decided to keep engaging me that way.
It shows, though, in the photography I've seen of yours, all the live performances you've captured him. It sounds ridiculous, but I can say it because it's to you and you're the person with the camera, but he's got that trust in the photo, if that makes sense. He looks relaxed, he looks at ease, he's not blinking halfway, playing his guitar, and his hair's all over. You've captured the moment, and that moment is probably because he knows it's you and he's trusting you, and it's hard to express because you're the person that took the photo, but his photo...
No, you're right. Yeah. And I think, again, when I was on tour with them and on the road, because it was a continuous thing day after day, it also became such a part of our dynamic. I would be wandering around doing my own thing, crawling around, shooting from this angle or that angle. But every once in a while, during the performance or during warm-up or something, he would look for me and find me in the room and make eye contact, and then just have a little smile and then keep doing what he was doing. I think that type of intimacy was so seductive, for what I was doing and the way I felt about him and how I was portraying him. And I feel like he was very aware of that, but I don't think that makes it less sincere. I still think it was a sincere connection, but there was a usefulness of that for him, that's how he wanted to be seen or portrayed or viewed. And, and I was certainly willing to do that.
I think the word that keeps tapping away while you're talking to me is just authentic, and that's what other people wouldn't be able to capture. You could, because it was real.
Well, that was his primary concern, I think, all the time, that he was being authentic, that he was being authentic with himself, that he was being authentic with his audience, that he was being sincere, So I think, for instance, when Sony or someone was trying to depict him in a way that he didn't think was authentic to him, he was very resistant to that. He wanted it to be real, and and again, at that time in the 90s, that was also an idea that was very prevalent with a lot of artists. As the corporation grew and grew and become more dominant in people's lives, that artists wanted to maintain some sense of authenticity, became kind of the word on everybody's lips. Is this authentic? And, I don't feel like people are focused on that idea in the same way now as they used to be. Like, I feel like people are much more willing to trust the corporation now, whereas at that time in the 90s, that definitely wasn't how artists were, at least artists in New York were looking at the corporation. Certainly not with trust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's scary, isn't it, how the common thing we've mentioned today is how photography's changed, how the music industry's changed, how New York has changed. And it's just everything is changing. Everything is so disposable now. I used to love queuing up at a record store, buying an album, waiting for it, getting there first thing in the morning, buying that, taking it home, reading the booklet, all the words, looking at the pictures, even the smell of a brand new CD. And now it's just download, listen, delete,
Yeah, well, that was also part of the thing about making the book 12 inches by 12 inches, which is the same size as a vinyl record. It also hails back to this idea, like when I was a kid, it was bigger, it wasn't CDs, it was records, and you'd open them up and there was pictures, and sometimes they were double fold outs. The album art was part of the experience of getting a record. And and also I'm lucky to be in this gallery, Morrison Hotel Gallery, which is run by a photographer named Henry Diltz, who did, like some of the most famous 70s album covers that existed. And he, they at that time they created album packaging design with the photography. For the first time, it would be like an art director doing it instead of somebody from the record company, or a photographer in the band would come up with a concept. That really, I loved that idea that the visuals were just as much a part of the experience as the music. Or maybe not quite as much, but at least it was something that supported the music.
I think that's why vinyl's doing so well and had such a comeback now, and I think at the moment it outsells CDs again, because people miss that. People miss the artwork and the whole experience again. It's that nostalgia trip, and I miss it, and that's why I'm buying my favourite classic albums of all time again on vinyl, so I've got them. It sounds better, but also it's nice just to have the whole package.
Yes, it's a different experience, and it's more, I think also as things become more abstract and as you said, soundbitey and short, and everything's like blah 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 coming at you, that to have something solid and that you can hold in your hands, that you can touch and experience what maybe experience in a more long form way. It's not abbreviated. I think that's I can see how people would be hungry for that now.
I know so many listeners right now that we're going, shut up, Mark, you sound like a granddad, just get with it, download Spotify, listen to music, it's easy, you can have 1,000 songs in your pocket, you old git.
That's too easy, darn it. Too easy.
It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today, and I've absolutely loved the journey you've taken me on, and hearing all about you growing up and how it's all worked out and how you're still doing it now and your life's changed, and it seems like you've had a great time and you've still got great times ahead. So I just want to say a massive thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, no, photography has been a wonderful adventure and it continues to be so. And it was a pleasure talking to you as well.
So there it is. There's my interview with me and Merri. Such a great person, such a beautiful person, and so honest and so deep. And I really do appreciate just how honest the interview went and just how much she let me into the life that she spent with Jeff. So I'm very, very grateful, and it is really genuinely a dream come true to have that time with Merri. If you haven't checked out Merri's work, go on her website, go on her Instagram, go on her Twitter. Everything's available online, and just look at the amazing work she's done and still doing to this day. She's very, very talented and an absolute genius, and I love all her work that's out there. I checked out A Wished For Song. That was one of the first books I got, and recently I bought it for one of my best friends, Darren. It's such a beautiful book. It's so well put together with some amazing images of Jeff, some amazing words, and honestly you'll sit there and get lost in it. It's one of those books that you just have to own and you'll keep dipping in and going back to it all the time. But the most recent book, 25 Years of Grace, is this hardback edition that's just come out. It is gorgeous. The picture quality is stunning, much larger images, much higher quality images, and as a fan of photography you will adore it. But if you're a fan of Jeff Buckley, you will fall in love. It's stunning. It's my new favourite book, and I urge you all to go out and check it out. It is absolutely gorgeous. You know the score by now. If you go on to markandme.com, you can get links to my Twitter, my Facebook, my Instagram, and my email address. I make sure that I check every single message you leave me, every email I'll respond to, and every social media comment I'll always action and reply. I love reading the response to the episodes, and I usually share them all with the guests as well, who love reading it. So if you love today's episode, jump online, leave a comment, or pass me a message, and I'll forward it on to Merri, because she'll love reading all the amazing response and positive feedback. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to join me, and again, there is a Patreon site on there as well. If you want to sign up, you can sign up there for as little as 70p. That's all it is, and for that you get an episode a week of Mark and Me. You also get chances to win loads of great prizes, and what I'm trying to do at the moment, with all the guests that I have on the podcast, I try and get something quite unique, especially if the guests can sign something for me or give me something from their collection. And with that, it goes straight up for you guys on the Patreon page. It's my way of saying thank you for all the support and all the guidance you give me with this podcast, and I can't thank you enough. I want to dedicate today's episode to someone very special, someone that's been there for me a lot, and someone that's made me a much better person. You know who you are, and this is dedicated to you, so thank you very much. I will be back in 1 week's time with a brand new episode, and in the meantime, stay safe, and I'll see you all then.
Perhaps it is the color of the sun caught flat and covering the crossroads I'm standing at. Or maybe it's the weather or something like that. But mama, you've been on my mind. I mean no trouble, please don't put me down, don't get upset, I am not pleading. Oh, saying I can't forget you. I do not pace the floor, bow down and bend, but yet, well, mommy, you've been on my mind. Even though my eyes are hazy and my thoughts, they might be narrow, where you been, don't bother me. Or bring me down with sorrow. I don't even mind who you'll be waking with tomorrow. But mama, you just on my mind. I am not asking you to say words like yes or no, please understand me. I have no place I'm calling you to go. I'm just whispering to myself so I can't pretend that I don't know. Mommy's just on my mind. When you wake up in the morning, baby, look inside your mirror. You know I won't be next to you, you know I won't be near. I'd just be curious to know if you can see yourself as clear as someone who has had you on his mind.